The night air in Southern California was still, the highway stretching endlessly like a ribbon of shadows under dim yellow lights. A lone man stood by the roadside, hand raised, hoping for a ride. When Randy Kraft pulled over, the weary stranger believed luck had arrived. Instead, he had unknowingly stepped into the orbit of a man whose inner world was darker than anything the open road could offer. For years, young men disappeared across the freeways and backstreets of California, their lives reduced to whispers, their families left with questions and silence. The link between them seemed elusive. Different towns, different nights, different circumstances, yet one detail tied them together. The final moments of trust placed in a stranger who looked unassuming, polite, maybe even helpful. Randy Stephen Kraft, born in 1945 in Long Beach, grew up as the only son among sisters in a working-class household. To the neighbors, he was quiet, studious, almost invisible. He joined the Boy Scouts, got good grades, and attended church. Outwardly, he blended into the background of suburban America, an image that would later shield him for decades as he prowled California's highways. By the late 1960s, Kraft had embraced his intelligence. He studied economics at Claremont Men's College, where he impressed professors with his sharp mind. But behind the ambition and the polite smiles, Kraft wrestled with a concealed identity. He was gay at a time when acceptance was scarce, and the double life he led seemed to fracture something deep inside him. When he joined the Air Force, his life followed the expected path of discipline and duty. Yet in 1969, he was discharged, some say honorably, others hinting at suspicions about his sexuality. That rejection marked a turning point back in civilian life. Kraft found work in computers and politics, even volunteering for Republican campaigns. To his colleagues, he was articulate and reliable. To strangers at bars, he was charming. But to the young men he encountered after dark, he was something else entirely. The early 1970s saw the first whispers of terror. Bodies began surfacing along Southern California freeways. Naval personnel, hitchhikers, students. The victims were young, healthy, and mostly male. Police noted signs of binding, brutal assaults, and chillingly bizarre mutilations. Yet the murders blended into a landscape already haunted by killers like the Zodiac and the Manson family. Another body on a highway could have been anyone's work. But Kraft was different. He was meticulous. He photographed some of his victims, documented his crimes in cryptic notes, and ensured that evidence vanished as quickly as the men themselves. Investigators struggled to connect the dots. The highways became hunting grounds, and Randy Kraft, ever polite, ever normal to those around him, drove those roads with a smile that concealed the thoughts only he understood. And somewhere, deep in the privacy of his mind, or perhaps scribbled in code on scraps of paper, was a ledger, a twisted record of lives taken, reduced to nicknames and phrases only he could decode. It was not yet discovered, but it existed, waiting for the day when his careful facade would fracture. That day was still years away. For now, the sickening thoughts of Randy Kraft traveled silently beside him, mile after mile, while California slept. The sound of tires humming on the 405 freeway masked the muffled cries inside Randy Kraft's car. One moment, the vehicle was an ordinary Toyota Corolla gliding through the night. The next, it was a chamber of horror rolling on wheels. Yet Kraft's composure remained steady, eyes fixed on the road, his hand occasionally tightening on the wheel as though the very act of driving was part of his ritual. When the first bodies were found in Orange County, detectives saw patterns but no clear suspect. The victims, often Marines on leave, young hitchhikers, or men leaving gay bars, appeared vulnerable. Yet their deaths were brutal. Some had been strangled with belts or ropes. Others bore chemical burns, cigarette marks, or had objects inserted in ways too horrific to describe in detail. The sheer cruelty suggested not only murder, but experimentation. But Kraft had mastered invisibility. He lived with his longtime partner, Jeff Seelig, in a quiet Westminster neighborhood, Neighbors saw two men keeping to themselves, throwing barbecues and decorating for holidays. Randy worked in computer consulting, a rising field in the late 70s. He was employed, stable, intelligent, everything that did not fit the image of a serial killer. Still, investigators noticed details they couldn't ignore. Several victims were last seen entering cars with strangers. One witness described a clean-cut man offering a ride. Another recalled a polite tone. Nothing threatening, just enough to earn trust. And always, the car pulled away into the night. By the late 70s, the number of victims had reached dozens. At first, police assumed multiple killers could be involved. Some believed the infamous freeway killer was one man. Others theorized it was several working independently. Given the vast distances and different methods of disposal, in fact, 3 separate killers were operating in California at the same time. William Bonin, Patrick Kearney, and Randy Kraft, each targeting similar victims, each leaving trails of bodies along highways. This overlap clouded the investigation. Some victims attributed to Kraft may have been Bonin's or Kearney's, and vice versa. But Kraft's cruelty, his attention to detail, made his victims stand apart, unlike Bonin, who was impulsive and often sloppy. Kraft was deliberate. He kept track. The most chilling discovery came in 1975, when police began to suspect the murders were being logged, though they hadn't found the infamous scorecard yet. Whispers of Kraft's habit of writing notes began to surface. Victims weren't just killed, they were itemized. To Kraft, they weren't human beings but entries in a diary, trophies coded in words only he could savor. Each night he drove, a stranger's fate could be sealed in a quiet click of the car door. And while the public relaxed in suburban homes or laughed in seaside bars, Randy Kraft's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to highways, to power, and to the calculated cruelty of turning life into lines of ink on paper. What the world didn't know was that the list was growing. Every ride, every victim, another entry. And soon, when investigators finally uncovered it, the scorecard would shake them to their core. The discovery came almost by accident in 1983. A California Highway Patrol officer noticed a Toyota Celica swerving erratically near Mission Viejo. Inside was Randy Kraft, calm, but visibly intoxicated. Next to him in the passenger seat was the lifeless body of a Marine, slumped and still warm. The officer's flashlight swept across the shocking scene. Strangulation marks, evidence of binding, and empty beer bottles scattered like props of a night gone wrong. Kraft was arrested on the spot, but it was only once detectives searched his vehicle that the true horror emerged. Hidden in the trunk were thousands of Polaroid photos, showing young men in various stages of undress, some unconscious, others clearly lifeless. And among his belongings was a spiral notebook filled with cryptic notes. The pages contained nearly 70 entries, nicknames, shorthand phrases, strange codes that investigators quickly realized were not random. This was the scorecard. Each line represented a victim, though not always by name. Some were identified through context: Maureen Carson, EDM, Portland, MCHB. Others remained hauntingly vague, forever unsolved, forever coded. To Kraft, it was a personal ledger of conquest. To police, it was a map of murders stretching back over a decade. The chilling detail wasn't just the number of entries, it was the casual tone. The way human lives had been reduced to inside jokes, shorthand, and flippant nicknames. Detectives realized the list could indicate far more victims than Kraft had ever been connected to, possibly 67, perhaps more. When confronted, Kraft denied everything. He claimed the notebook was harmless, the photos simply mementos, and the body in his car a tragic accident. But his calm demeanor, his ability to dismiss overwhelming evidence with a smile, unsettled even hardened investigators. Back at his home, another disturbing find awaited. Police uncovered books on military procedures, notes about chemistry, and even more Polaroids. Some of the victims had never been reported missing. Others had families who had searched for them for years, Now, their final moments were reduced to still images stacked carelessly in Kraft's possession. The sheer scope of the case became overwhelming. How many victims were there? Could all 67 entries be traced? Prosecutors faced the challenge of proving each one in court, but the evidence, the body in the car, the photos, the scorecard painted a picture too chilling to ignore. And as word spread to the media, the public learned of the scorecard killer. Yet behind the headlines, investigators wrestled with a deeper question. How could a man with a career, a partner, and a seemingly normal life have carried such darkness undetected for so long? The trial would attempt to answer that. But first, the notebook had to be decoded, line by line, body by body, each victim given back his stolen humanity. And with every revelation, the sickening thoughts of Randy Kraft grew louder, echoing through the courtroom before the world. In the packed courtroom, the families of victims sat shoulder to shoulder, clutching tissues, photographs, and hope for justice. At the defense table, Randy Kraft wore suits and glasses, his appearance closer to that of an accountant than a serial killer. Yet as prosecutors presented their case, the facade began to crack. The notebook was introduced as Exhibit A. Line by line, investigators testified about their attempts to match the cryptic entries with real victims. Some connections were solid. Marine Carson linked to a Marine named Richard Keith, found in 1975. Portland matched a victim discovered during a Kraft trip to Oregon. Others remained frustratingly unsolved, names that would forever remain mysteries to grieving families. Polaroids were shown to the jury, each one a gut punch. Some jurors wept openly, others turned away. Prosecutors described patterns of torture, methods of restraint, the chilling chemical burns that indicated Kraft used substances to paralyze his victims while keeping them conscious. The cruelty was deliberate, the suffering prolonged. Defense attorneys countered with an argument of coincidence. They claimed the notebook was meaningless, the photos harmless, the evidence circumstantial. They painted Kraft as a misunderstood man caught in the crosshairs of hysteria. But the sheer weight of evidence buried such claims. Witnesses described seeing Kraft cruising gay bars, offering rides, or lingering at Marine bases. Former acquaintances recalled his dark jokes, his fascination with control, and most damning of all, the Marine in his passenger seat the night of his arrest provided prosecutors with an undeniable final victim. The trial dragged on for months, each day peeling back another layer of Kraft's secret life. Journalists dubbed him the Scorecard Killer, a name that spread through headlines like wildfire. To the public, it wasn't just the murders that shocked them, it was the methodical, organized way he treated them like items on a list. By May of 1989, after one of the longest and most expensive trials in California history, the jury returned with a verdict. Randy Kraft was convicted of 16 murders, though authorities believe he was responsible for dozens more. The judge sentenced him to death. Yet even in that moment, as families wept and embraced, Kraft sat still, almost indifferent, as though the trial had been just another entry in his own mental ledger. The scorecard had ended in court, but its shadow lingered, leaving investigators with unanswered questions. Because the notebook wasn't fully solved, many entries remain mysterious, pointing to victims never found, stories never told, for families still searching. The verdict was justice but not closure. And for Kraft, sitting in a cell awaiting execution, the silence of his thoughts remained impenetrable. Did he remember each victim? Or did he simply remember the numbers, the nicknames, the cold satisfaction of another entry written in ink? The death row wing of San Quentin prison echoed with the footsteps of guards, the clang of doors, and the muffled voices of men condemned. Randy Kraft lived among them, his routine methodical, his demeanor calm. He read books, wrote letters, and occasionally granted interviews where he continued to deny the murders. To the outside world, he was either a monster or a man wrongly accused, depending on which narrative one chose to believe. But the evidence spoke louder than any denial. The scorecard remained the most chilling artifact, a serial killer as diary that hinted at far more victims than the state ever proved in court. Even decades after his conviction, cold case investigators revisited unsolved murders across the country, wondering if Kraft's reach extended beyond California and Oregon. Some speculated his victims could number over 100. Families clung to the hope of answers. Mothers and fathers of missing sons wrote letters, pleading for acknowledgement, a confession, anything that could bring closure. Kraft never responded. He kept his silence, his thoughts locked away as tightly as his cell. Psychologists who studied the case debated what drove him. Was it control, sexual sadism, the repression of a double life, or simply the thrill of recording lives as though they were points in a game? The truth seemed to lie in a mixture of all. Kraft's methodical nature, his intelligence, and his need for dominance created a predator unlike most others. Meanwhile, his appeal stretched on. Lawyers challenged evidence, questioned the handling of the notebook, and argued over technicalities. But the death sentence remained. Randy Kraft would live his remaining years under the shadow of execution, though California's death penalty system meant the day might never come. And so, the story lingered. The Scorecard Killer's name etched into true crime history, his crimes studied in criminology courses, his case file stacked in evidence rooms like grim reminders of what one man could conceal behind a smile. But still, some pages of his notebook remained unsolved. Victims unnamed, families unknown, ghosts in the margins of Kraft's handwriting, waiting for recognition that might never arrive. The prison yard lay quiet under the dim evening light as Randy Kraft shuffled back to his cell. Time had eroded his once youthful face, but not the memories that lived behind his eyes. Decades had passed since his arrest, yet the scorecard continued to haunt investigators and families alike. Each code, each shorthand phrase, was a whisper of a life lost, some identified, others forever hidden. For the families who sat through the trial, justice had been delivered. But justice doesn't erase empty chairs at dinner tables. Birthdays never celebrated. Voices never heard again. Mothers carried photographs of sons who never came home. Siblings grew older, forever marked by the absence of someone who vanished into the night, only to be reduced to a line in a killer's notebook. And so, Randy Kraft remains on death row, California's appeals system keeping his fate suspended in legal limbo. He is now one of the longest-serving death row inmates in the state, outliving some of the very parents who once demanded his execution. The story of the Scorecard Killer is not simply one of numbers or courtrooms. It is about the fragility of trust, the dangers of invisibility, and the horrifying reminder that monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear glasses, hold stable jobs, and drive politely on the freeway until the car door closes and the highway stretches ahead. The sickening thoughts of Randy Kraft were never fully revealed. His notebook spoke louder than words, a chilling reminder that the darkest corners of the human mind can be hidden in plain sight. Each entry was more than ink on paper. It was a stolen life, a family shattered, a secret carried down a lonely road, and somewhere, even now, there may still be names on that list that we will never know, lives forever silenced, recorded only in the cold shorthand of a man who treated murder like a game. The scorecard remains a riddle, a ledger of horror, and a lasting reminder that evil, once it hides behind ordinary smiles, can travel undetected for years. The highways of California no longer belong to Randy Kraft, but the memory of what he did there still lingers, a warning written in shadows. Trust can be deadly, and sometimes the most polite smile conceals the darkest of thoughts.